Today, we're going to install Windows 10 as a virtual machine on top of your host operating system. The hypervisor of choice that I'm going to use today is VMware Workstation, and I have it already installed. This guide will not cover how you can install or how you can obtain this, but once you have it installed, you can follow this guide to set up a new Windows 10 virtual machine from scratch. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Create a New Virtual Machine. And for me, I like to customize my virtual machine's configuration so I can get that granular control over my virtual machine. And I'm going to use the default settings on this screen. And I'm going to select an ISO image that I have previously downloaded. So so this is asking you for the Windows 10 installation medium. And the way that you can get it is by going to the Microsoft website to download Windows 10. So you can first start by downloading a tool. And after that tool is downloaded, you can open that tool to download the ISO image file into your computer. I already have it here on my desktop, so I'm just going to use this here. So I'm going to browse and click that ISO image. And it says Windows 10 64-bit detected. This is expected. And so I'm going to give it a name. I'm going to call it MSW MS, well, W10 MS5. And just take note of where this location or the location of your virtual machine will reside. The virtual disks and related files will be here in this directory. We're going to use UEFI BIOS, or rather the UEFI firmware type. UEFI is the type of firmware that comes with new motherboards and new computers. BIOS is something that is legacy. We're not going to check secure boot today since we're installing Windows 10 and we don't need any additional security features in storing keys. So UEFI, no secure boot. I'm going to recommend for Windows 10, you want at least two physical processors with two vCores per processor. That would give you a total of four processor cores. And this is highly dependent on your system, right? Most of you may have computers that have at least four cores and 16 gigabytes of RAM and above. And for those, I would think you can at least run one virtual machine on your system. But if you're one who have like two cores or 8 gigabytes of RAM, I would recommend against, right, you running any virtual machines in your computer because the amount of hardware resources that your computer has is barely sufficient to power your host operating system. So in this case, in my computer, and you can check your resources either through the task manager or through the DirectX diagnostics tool, right? So if you go to the task manager and look at performance, if you go to CPU, you can take a look at the number of cores that you have. I know by default it looks something like this, and so you can right-click the graph area, change graph, the logical processors. So in total, I have here about 8 physical cores and therefore 16 virtual cores. And I have 64 gigabytes of memory, which would put me in a good position to run a few virtual machines. So in this case, I'm going to give it two physical cores and two virtual cores per physical core. So 2 times 2, that is 4. And for memory, for Windows 10, you should at least provision 4 gigabytes of memory. In fact, 4 is hardly sufficient. I would recommend 8, but that is if you have the resources to spare. So if you're running on 16 gigabytes of memory on your computer, then you should be able to provision 8 gigabytes just for this virtual machine. If not, if you're on an 8 gigabyte RAM system, then I would advise against running a VM. But if you must, you can try to provision one at 4 gigabytes. So for network type, I'm going to use bridged just because I want my virtual machine to have its own internal IP address instead of sharing the same internal IP with the host. But it is up to you. If you don't know what you're doing, then use bridged networking. The second one will work as well. Just do not select the third and the fourth, in which case you will not have internet access. So we can select the default. So try not to select SCSI or SCSI because there are additional uh, steps later if you're trying to configure your VM to run games that would detect the VM and prevent your game from running. And so most modern computers are running NVMe type disks. If your computer is rather old, you may want to choose SATA. Again, don't recommend SCSI or IDE. IDE is especially legacy belonging to computers back in the early 2000s. So NVMe is what I'm going to use because my disk runs on NVMe as a hardware. And we're going to create a new virtual disk. And this virtual disk will eventually become the C drive of your Windows 10 environment. So it is up to you how much space that you want to provision. I'm going to do 128 gigabytes. But also, I don't want to split my virtual disk into multiple files, right? Because splitting the disk into multiple files would make it easier for copying and pasting. So you can copy chunks at a time, and if some chunks fail, then you don't have to copy all of the chunks again, right? And you can just continue from where you left off. But I prefer to store my virtual disk as a single file to increase performance of my virtual machine. And it's unlikely that I'll try, to transfer this virtual machine to a different computer. So I'm going to give it 128 gigabytes, and I'm not going to allocate all the disk space now. The good thing about not checking this is this single file will start to grow in size proportionate to the amount of space that you use on your operating system. But if you choose to allocate all disk space now, then that's going to create a 128 gigabytes file immediately. So I'd rather it grow as I use because I may not be using all 128 gigs at all. And it's going to give you a default name for the VM disk, and I'm okay with this name, so I'm going to click on next. And take a look at this is the hardware configuration, right? So 8 gigabytes of RAM, 128 gigabytes of hard disk space, and 4 CPU cores. That looks about right, right? So I'm just going to uncheck this first just to show you because once the computer turns on, you have to react very quickly to bring up the Windows 10 installer. So I'm just going to click on finish. And VMware Workstation is going to go ahead and create the virtual machine. So once the virtual machine is created, it's going to show you this screen with a new tab with your VM's name on it, right? And double check all of this, the configuration here is correct. All right. And so at this point, I can go ahead and power on this virtual machine and quickly click into this black area because the next thing that you need to do, see that? That was a quick message that says press any key to boot from the DVD, right? You have to type any or press any key on your keyboard while your cursor is in the virtual machine environment. Otherwise, you would miss, right, the time window to boot into Windows installation, and then it goes into a network boot, which then you have to power off. So if you didn't react in time, what you can do is you can then go into VM and go to power and just restart guest or power off and restart again. But since I was able to make it into the installer, I'm just gonna go ahead and install my Windows virtual machine. You can customize your locale and language, that is up to you. Although if you're trying to use this virtual machine for gaming, especially smaller games, then you want to stick with English, right? Just because some, especially Asian character sets, those are not typically recognized by many games. So next, install. And it's going to ask me for a key. I'm going to skip this and enter it at a later point of time. And I'm going to select Windows 10 Pro just because my key works with Windows 10 Pro. Take a moment to go through the licensing terms. Obviously, you have to agree to it before you can continue. So make sure you validate this. Accept. Next. And we're not going to perform an upgrade because there's no existing operating systems to begin with on this virtual machine. So I'm going to click on custom, and the default selected disk shows me that I have 128 gigabyte disk that is currently unallocated. Tip in older Windows installations, you have to format the disk before you can install it. But in Windows 10, you can just click next and it will do everything necessary to bring the disk into a installable format. In this area, it's going to take, or at this step, it's going to take some time, typically around 5 to 10 minutes, depending on the speed of your system. And once this is done, your installer will restart the virtual machine. So I'm not going to fast forward this part, um, just so that you can get a handle or a good estimation on how long this process takes. Okay, we're going to restart. And by this time, right, Windows is installed into your virtual machine. It's going to boot up for the first time, and it's going to start up and set up services and allow you to create a user account. So all the while, you can see there's this yellow information box at the bottom. Uh, Essentially, when Windows has finished installing, it's gonna not have any of the graphics drivers and other things needed for Windows to run smoothly within the virtualized environment. So the information box below is just that when you have finished, set up a user account, got your internet working, it's gonna allow you to install some of the drivers necessary to run Windows properly. Right? The tool is called VMware Tools, and we're gonna install that so that it can for one, change the resolution to match the size of this area of black here you see on my screen. We will later have to disable VMware tools if you want to bypass checks, right, for games that do not run on virtualized environments. But that's a step for later. Again, you can customize this for your region. Right? So I'm going to set up for personal use. You will see this screen if you chose Windows 10 Pro. If you chose Windows 10 Home, this screen should not show up for you. And for me, I would not like to sign in with an online account or a Microsoft account. So I'm just going to select the offline account option on the bottom left. And this is just a page where Microsoft tries to convince you to sign in with a Microsoft account to Windows, but I'm gonna just go ahead with limited experience. And so I'm gonna call this account local admin. It's kind of just what I use. And I'm gonna give it a password. So if you choose to use a local account, you have to set this up or a set of security questions up because there are no other ways to reset your password if you forget it. So I'm just going to set this up with some dummy answers. And I'm just going to accept the default. Okay. So as you can see, I'm now on the Windows 10 desktop, um, but the screen resolution is really less than optimal. So, and this is partially because Windows 10 is not able to detect the graphics driver that this virtual environment needs or exposes to the operating system. So what I'm gonna do is, and you can see that, see this is our 128 gigabyte disk, and if I right click and go into Task Manager, you will be able to see under Performance, we have 4 vCores and 8 gigabytes of memory, right? So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna install this thing called VMware Tools that will give me optimal resolution, among other things. So this is the time where you go to the yellow information bar at the bottom and click on I finished installing. And so basically once you click that, okay, that didn't have the effect I intended. So let's see if we can do it through some other means. Here, right? So if you go to VM menu blade on the top, you can see there is an option here to install VMware tools, right? Click on that. And here there's one more yellow information bar that says you should be able to see VMware tools mounted as a disk drive, right? d/setup.exe. So this is where my disk drive is, and now it says VMware tools. So I'm gonna dismiss this information bar, and I'm gonna click on or right click, click on install or run program from your media, click on yes, and it's going to go through that process to install the necessary drivers. All of the default options are okay, and so you just have to click on next, and install. And as you can see, now it has detected my resolution. Everything seems to be good. And it's now asking for me to restart my computer. And I'm just gonna go ahead and do that. Okay, now I'm back in my virtual Windows. So here you can see this is a copy of Windows 10 running virtualized in VMware Workstation on top of a copy of Windows 11 that I have as my host operating system. And well, this pretty much sums up how you can install a new, or you can create and install a new virtual machine to run on your existing PCs. But obviously, the next step is to activate Windows and then go for a Windows update. But I will not show that in this video. Thank you.